All right, so this afternoon we are joined by Eunice Lehmacher, who is running for House Seat 3 in Pickens County up in Tiger Country. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thanks for having me. I got my orange on.
Perfect. I'm a Gamecock, but that's all right. We don't play this year, so we can be completely friendly.
Right.
We're going to count that as a win in Gamecockville because that's all we can get right now. So transitioning to K-12 education instead of college football. Would love for you to start by sharing with our members a little bit about how your personal and professional experiences have shaped your views on why education is important in South Carolina.
Yes, that's a great question. So since I was a little girl, I wanted to be a teacher. You would have found me in my room with all my stuffed animals lined up, teaching them my entire childhood. My first professional career was a high school math and physics teacher. After that, I've been teaching ever since, but moved into adults. So I worked in a church, taught K to senior. Right now I teach adults at Oconee Memorial Hospital. I've been a mental health counselor now as a master of social work for 20 years. And in the beginning, I was also a counselor at a high school in the Kentucky area. So I've served in schools also as a volunteer. My kids went to public school here at Daniel High School, and I was a volunteer as long as they would have me until they were older, so in the grade school age. So I love school, I love learning, I love teaching, and I care about teachers.
Awesome. And we obviously care about teachers as well as an association, but unfortunately, our state is having a crisis at the moment when it comes to our teaching workforce. Last year, we had over 6,500 teachers leave the classroom, and that resulted in 555 teaching vacancies. And we think that's a crisis for students in South Carolina. And so we'd love to hear how you, as a member of the General Assembly, would work to address teacher recruitment and retention in South Carolina.
Great question. I know that the teacher pay in South Carolina is lower than it is in many other states. We need to up the teacher pay at least 4%, 10%. I find it really disappointing that our state has had a surplus in the budget and didn't even raise teacher salaries or lower class sizes, both of which I think would help keep our teachers. So I know there's still a surplus. It's less of a surplus, and we're looking at a budget shortfall potentially due to COVID. But I say teachers and education is a top priority, and we still need to raise teacher salaries. We can't succeed at keeping our teachers without raising their salaries. But there's more. I'm in a rural area. Pickens County, especially my district, is largely rural. We've got to do things to recruit teachers to rural areas, maybe something with a housing allowance or transportation costs. I think we could do stuff with the Life Scholarship, with teacher to include education and other incentives, teaching fellows. So the state government, I think, needs to provide both incentives, of course, tax support, right? But also incentives, programs, maybe matching funds, state and counties working together. And I also think we need to work on teachers so Daniel High School, where my kids went to school, one of the best schools in the state, right? Probably easier to get teachers there. But there's a lot of places where teachers don't as much want to go and where they are not getting as good support. And I think we need to work on mentoring for new teachers, incentives to get teachers to go to some of those lower income schools, and ways. We haven't raised our teacher salary and benefits. I think the base cost of students hasn't been raised since 2008. It should be raised. It is in other states. So increase the benefits, increase mentoring. I could go on, but there's more we could do.
Thank you. And I love that you focused in a lot on our rural areas, because in South Carolina, you're right, that's a significant need. And one of the things that makes South Carolina education most well-known nationally, or potentially infamous, is the Supreme Court case in Abbeville that dealt with funding of our rural schools, where the state Supreme Court ruled that the General Assembly has an obligation to provide a, quote, minimally adequate education to all students in the state. Now, we as an association think that the minimally adequate bar is far too low, but we also acknowledge that in too many places we're not even hitting that bar, and we believe we need to serve the needs of all students. So if elected, what would you do to work toward ensuring educational equity and excellence for every student in South Carolina?
I trust teachers and I think they make the best decisions. So I think we need a group of teachers, administrators, parents. I've been talking to high schoolers recently and they're sort of frustrated that they don't get to have input. So how about we create, why should politicians make all the decisions about education? That's my opinion. Now, I'm a politician, hopefully, that has been a teacher, but not all politicians are, right? So let's get a group of teachers together who I trust to know what needs to be done, who are aware, and not just the teachers in the most popular, best achieving schools. Let's get some teachers that are and administrators that are in those districts that are lower funded and let them advise the school board. Of course, the school board needs to be elected and needs to be fairly elected. And I also would like to see parents be able to speak out. You're right, the equity problem is large. My husband is a professor in physics at Clemson University, so I talked to some of his colleagues also in engineering, and they do talk about how students come here unequally prepared for example, the math. I used to teach math, so I like that especially. And you can learn the math. They know that their engineering students can learn the math, but they just didn't have the same kind of coursework when they came from some parts of the state where maybe they didn't have as good teachers as we have up here. That's frustrating to the professors, right? The professors are trying to go out and help the teachers in that area. So let's have a statewide, that's the politician's role. Let's have a statewide effort to look at equity, to look at base cost. First of all, let's raise it. Let's raise the middle, right? So we're teaching, I know I taught classes of 30, right? You end up teaching not to the bottom two and the top two. Of course you do, you individualize. I mean, of course you do, but you're mostly teaching to the middle. So the way to raise the standard is to raise the middle, right? So if we could get all students achieving better by less standardized testing, by less requirements on teachers that aren't about teaching, by more incentives to keep our teachers, by incentives to send them to those poor and rural districts, I think we can raise the level of all of our students and everybody will get a better education. Again, I could say more, but we don't want to go on forever.
No, it's a great list, and you touched several times on funding issues. And so one of the big funding issues in the news right now in our schools was Governor McMaster's announcement in July of the creation of his SAFE Grants program using federal COVID relief dollars to create private school scholarships with $32 million in federal relief money. And in that announcement, he indicated that he hopes that the next session of the General Assembly will create a permanent version of his SAFE Grants voucher program. So if elected, and if the governor comes in his State of the State address and asks the General Assembly to move to a permanent voucher program, what would your position be?
I'm opposed to vouchers using state money for private schools. It's a very timely question. We're recording this on September 15th. The State House goes back together and meets tomorrow. And they're going to make decisions about the CARES Fund. The CARES Fund was sent to the states to take care of all children. When the governor suggests that it goes to private school vouchers for 5,000 private school families, that is not even close to how many children we have in the state. And we have very underfunded public education. So I'm opposed to the use of public funding for private schools. I'm not opposed to private schools. If people want to send their kids to private schools, that's fine. But an educated populace helps everyone. I think that's more apparent in 2020 than ever before. Y'all are teaching our children critical thinking. Everybody needs to learn that so they can vote, so they know how to avoid COVID. And that has got to happen to the entire population. Let's not take state or federal money and give it to private schools. Let's let that be a choice of parents.
This government teacher loved the civic engagement pitch right there on voting. So thank you for that. Another big issue before the General Assembly is for the last 2 years, they have tried to pass what the Speaker of the House has called the Education Reform Bill. The House passed a version last year. The Senate passed their version S419 this year. Odds are that the General Assembly, when they come back tomorrow, will not pass the finalized version. So this will probably carry over into the next session. If elected, if education reform is still on the agenda next year, what do you consider to be the key steps that South Carolina needs to take to reform our education system for the 21st century?
Yeah, so 419 is a larger and more complicated bill, so won't be able to address all of that. But one of the things it did was raise teacher salaries. I would vote for that. And I do think education needs to continue to be a priority. There's other things in it. And I don't know if you want to talk about in detail any of those, but I would just like to see that we continue to prioritize education. My biggest concern, so where you live should not determine what you can learn or what resources are available, but it does in South Carolina. And I'm afraid that that might be all the more true next year because of COVID. We're a state that's based on tourism and trade, both of industries that have been dramatically affected by COVID. And I already heard people in the State House talking about we need to save some of the surplus until in case there's something serious that comes up. My position is in 2020, some serious things came up. Just an example, I know in the school district of Pickens County, some teachers who are experienced, so they get higher pay, have been asked to retire. These are the teachers that are the mentors for other teachers. They're some of the best loved teachers, right? So not necessarily this fall, but by next fall, if you already took Terry or whatever the reason is, they're asking the higher paid teachers to go, we're gonna bring in new teachers. I say that's a crisis right now. I want those experienced teachers to teach the kids in my area, but also to be there for the new teachers coming in. So I don't think we need to wait for another governmental crisis to spend our surplus. And I don't think the only way to fund education is through tax dollars, although it's the main way, but we can find other creative ways to fund it. My children both participated in things like math counts. That's funded largely by engineers, right? Even so, the coaches didn't get salaries for that, right? I think they should, right? So I think we need to leverage things like companies. All companies and businesses should favor a good education. And we need to look at creative solutions, like I said before, incentives, taxes, and county, state, and business cooperation to increase funding for schools, because that's what's needed, plain and simple. We need more money to offer better programs.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we have covered a lot of ground with my questions, but I don't want to prevent you from being able to talk about anything that is near and dear to you that you want to make sure our members know. So is there anything we haven't covered that you want to make sure to share?
I don't think we talked much about standardized testing, and I think we should have less of that. I know some of it's needed, but I don't think standardized testing should be used to measure whether a teacher is effective or not, and to raise their salaries. And I just think there's too much time spent on standardized testing in the classroom. Again, I trust teachers to make decisions how to evaluate their students. On the subject of testing, and I'm a healthcare professional, I work for Coney Memorial Hospital. I'd like to see more COVID testing happening in the schools. I'd like to see hazard pay. I'm imagining there's a lot of staff doing overtime, doing things like cleaning doorknobs, pencils. At the hospital I work, we're mopping the floor way more often. Are those custodial staff getting the extra pay they deserve? Does everybody in the school system have the benefits they deserve? We need our teachers and our people that work in the lunchroom to get sick pay if they get COVID or if they get quarantined because they were exposed to COVID, right? So it's critical. I know teachers want to be with kids in school, but it's critical that everybody is safe, right? The teachers, the children, the parents. And again, one way to do that is with funding, right? So you guys have been doing the job of teaching plus everything else, parenting, policing, everything else. And now you have to be healthcare professionals too and teach kids what's 6 feet. I don't think any kid will get out of school not knowing what 6 feet is this year. As a math teacher, that makes me happy. True. But that's not really your job to be the healthcare professional. That's our job at the hospitals. So I think you need to be reimbursed for that extra time, for learning to do things virtually, for being creative. I think teachers are the frontline workers that deserve extra pay. And I just want you to know I'm going to prioritize education, especially in 2021, but in general in the future.
Fantastic. And thank you again for sharing your thoughts and your time with us this afternoon. And we wish you all the best this fall, and just thank you for your willingness to serve our state.
Thank you. I was glad to do it. Appreciate you doing this for everyone to help them know who to vote for.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.